We're live.
Hi, Austin.
Hey, Nirupa.
It's been a few months since we spoke.
Yeah, you had a little Indian adventure and went home, visit family, and we skipped an exploration, or maybe two. I don't know.
We skipped Hanuman.
We skipped the Hanuman, the strength and flexibility discussion.
But it's good to be back. It's good to be back here in Jersey City, and it's good to be back talking about the June exploration of the month, which to me is one of the most seminal mantras of Indian spirituality or religion, called the Gayatri Mantra. So I'm curious, actually, first, before we go into the Gayatri Mantra, what really got you started on this topic?
Well, one of the funniest things is that, like, my mentor in the Jivamukti method, her spiritual name was Gayatri. And it was the first mantra she made me learn as her apprentice. She was like, "You have to know this mantra." And at first I didn't really, it took me a long time to start to understand what it was speaking of, and to also understand that what we know as the Gayatri Mantra is actually part of a very long mantra, that this is just 4 lines that people chant or kind of know, but actually the Gayatri Mantra is much more involved. I became very fascinated with the idea of, in its original form, it was the idea of sun worship, savitur, the sun god, and his consort, the Gayatri, and worshiping of them. And then later on, as the yoga tradition really started to develop, in the Upanishad period, it became more about the internal light within the individual. And that I became very fascinated with what would cause a culture to go from a very external explanation of something to a very internal explanation of something. And because that's a major philosophical switch within a culture, and thinking about how that's never really happened in the tradition that I was brought up in, which was Christianity. That there are lines within the Bible that actually keep you from exploring the idea of internal wisdom over something that's outside of you. The Bible's very clear about saying that that the man who, or the person who thinks they are God, is an abomination, or is actually traveling down the wrong road of spirituality. Whereas in the yoga tradition, the idea of internal knowledge is identifying with the fact that all beings have a spark of divinity within them, and yoga actually allows that illumination to show through.
That's lovely. You know, it's interesting to hear from you on your own tradition and growing up in Alabama. My association with the Gayatri Mantra is actually that I went to a very Hindu school called Bharatiya Vidya Bhavan, and we used to chant shlokas every day for prayer and for assembly. And so the shloka chanting was very much within my childhood. Like, I did this every day and I looked forward to it. But I don't remember ever chanting the Gayatri Mantra, because I think the Gayatri Mantra was considered very sacred and to be uttered with a lot of care and with a lot of, in a very ritualistic fashion.
Yeah.
So it was a bit of a surprise, actually, when I would hear it chanted in yoga studios here.
Yeah.
You know? And I, for those of you who are listening to us, and if you're wondering, if you're not familiar with the Gayatri Mantra, it is Om bhur bhuvah svah, varēnyam, Bhargō dēvasya dhimahi, dhiyō prachōdayat. Now, this profound 4-line incantation that I chant in urban sadhu, but growing up and being in India, it was a very special incantation.
Yes. Well, it's also very special in the tradition because it's the 7 rishis, the original children of Brahman, the sons of Brahman, that actually through meditation find realization through the Gayatri Mantra. That realization comes from the Gayatri Mantra. And the Gayatri Mantra, like Om, is the only mantra that is actually considered to be the energetic of the divine. All other mantras, no other mantra is considered, not even the Maha Mantra is considered to have actually the essence of the divine in it, but the Gayatri Mantra is considered to have divinity within its words, like Om. And so
what is it about the Gayatri Mantra that contains the essence of this divinity? I think you speak about light. You spoke about internal light and external light, but what is it about the mantra itself?
Well, I think that it starts out, the first three words are after Om is translates into earth, space, and heaven. So it's actually identifying the practitioner with the physical plane, the mental plane, and then the spiritual plane. It's kind of telling you or giving you a roadmap.
And how is it connected to the body, by the way? So the gross body, the subtle, so it does that map?
Yeah, it's first the gross body, then the more subtle body, then the spiritual body, the Atman that is expounding into infinity. And then it goes on to we worship this, we worship the radiant light, savitur, and may that light inspire our intellect, our spiritual intellect, give us knowledge. It's interpreted in a lot of different ways. So that idea that radiant light first starts on the outside, but then becomes internal, is that moment when the rishis start to see that wisdom is within themselves, right? And this is very powerful because, within this time period, these practitioners of the beginnings of yoga, they're not writing stuff down. They're orally transmitting stuff to each other. Unlike Judaism and Christianity, which really Judaism in its earliest form, before Christianity, is writing stuff down in the Sinai desert. They're writing the words of wisdom down, and therefore the words on the written word has the power of God within it, right? The Ten Commandments is written by the hand of God, and therefore those tablets are infused with God's energy, and God is outside of you. However, if you're from an oral tradition where you're uttering something and teaching it to somebody else or saying it to yourself, those words are in you. It's not outside of you.
Oh, that's beautiful.
And so the two traditions have this, they see the world from opposite poles. One, the written word is the divine essence of God, and it becomes law. It becomes unmovable. Like you can't adjust it because it's been written. Then you have this other tradition that the divine word is verbal, vocal, or even mental, internal, and it's actually can be changed. It can be shifted subtly because the interpretation can change because it's never been put down into orthodoxy through writing.
Oh, that's really profound. And that it also, I wonder if it kind of underpins the evolution of this mantra itself and how it went from worshiping a more animistic force, which is the sun, which is a very important deity in Indian mythology and scriptures, and to Gayatri herself, right? And what is also fascinating to me is, and I think this is probably a very orthodox interpretation, I suspect that at parts of Indian history, women were not allowed to chant this mantra. I
They
suspect
were not at some
it
point.
probably was the realm of the priests. And not a lot of women were priests at that point in time, and of the priestly class, I would think. Of
Right.
course, things have changed now. The thing that is interesting to me about what you just talked about in terms of the light within, of course, you've seen numerous pictures of deities in Indian mythology and scriptures being portrayed with the aura, right? And you have this even with the Buddha, and like you have this concept of this energetic, that they are depicted as energetic beings of light.
Right. Svayamprakasha.
Yeah, Svayamprakasha. What is interesting to me is that our culture and our tradition in India, I think we were taught the Brahman and the Atman being the individual soul, and the individual souls become a collection of the universal consciousness, which is the Brahman.
Right.
Despite having grown up with that, this concept of the light within you and you being a light being, me being a light being, it has taken me some time to understand and to embody and to respect and to really celebrate it. And actually, strangely, you know where I got this from? And when I think in your June exploration, you talk about what does light mean to you. This getting in touch with light started with me working with energetic ways of healing.
Yeah.
With Reiki, with pranic healing, where you kind of get in touch with your aura and the prana.
Yes.
And then you have other schools of mysticism, like the Taro. You talk about other divinity schools, which are actually non-traditional. Maybe they're even like in the pagan tradition.
Right.
Where they talk about us as light beings, like very explicitly, and you have light workers. But the subject matter is it's almost heresy in some parts.
Yes. I mean, well, it's like I said, within Islam and Christianity, I mean, I forget which Sufi mystic uttered, you know, he came out of deep meditation and he said, I am God. And the next day he had his head chopped off, because he was a heretic all of a sudden. I forget who that was. I'll have to look it up. I used to know. In some traditions, this idea that you have divinity within you, even a spark or even full divine, is heresy, and it really takes a lot of self-confidence for a person to start to believe that maybe they have divinity within themselves. The yoga practice is very wise, right? I mean, yoga tradition is very like sophisticated. So, you know, yoga automatically from Patanjali to everybody else says, look, you know, you have this thing called the ego. And this ego and this misidentification is going to get you in trouble. So you have to keep coming back and practicing. You have to practice your meditation. You have to practice your sadhanas. You have to practice, if it's later hatha yoga, pranayamas, you know, your yamas and niyamas, to keep the ego in check, because you know, you hear this, there is that problem within this mantra. The beauty of it is, the ugly side of it is that I hear that I am a light being and radiant and godlike, and all of a sudden I'm just an egomaniac because I had a taste of that, and I don't really have the ego in check yet, right? And this is literally where we see, you know, within the yoga tradition, gurus going bad and problems happening within any spiritual tradition where people are devoted to spirituality, but then you find out that they're like, you know, stealing from the church funds, or they're like sleeping with the parishioners, the minister sleeping with the parishioners' wives, or they're like the sexual abuse of children. You know, we've seen it all. And this is that idea that you hear these utterances of your connection to God, but then you really aren't practicing on controlling the ego. And the yoga tradition is constantly, Patanjali, Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita, over and over again, you got to get the ego in check. You got to keep the ego under control. You got to be aware of the idea that your mind can trick you into things, to believing that you are, something that you're not.
It's also, it's interesting that you say that, because I was reading some translations of the mantra from some Indian websites, and it talks about it as being it's like, it invokes the universal deity to remove your sins, to cleanse you of your sins. And that seems profoundly different, right? Like from your translation of this as well. And I just wonder, like there's so many interpretations of the mantra itself, but essentially like offering yourself at the feet to kind of cleanse yourself as immortal human.
I think that anytime you see the word sin, and within the traditions of India, that is an influence from the Portuguese and the Moguls. Like that is, it's an outside, there is no concept in the yoga tradition of sin. There's karma. You can create karma. You can, and we all create karma because karma means action. And if we're living, we're creating action. And there will be a reaction to that karma, but karma is very different from sin, right? Sin is an abomination against God. And it is your sin that keeps you from God. That is the Christian tradition. That is the Islamic tradition. Your sin is what is offensive to God. God is never offended within the yoga tradition. God doesn't, he's not, he, she, it, whatever it is not offended by its own creation. That's, it knows what it has created.
Yeah.
You don't know it, it knows you.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's a big, like I said, it's polar opposites of the theory of spirituality. And so I think anytime you see a modern interpretation of somebody using the word sin, they've been influenced by outside traditions to use a word like that. Then you have to, but I do think then from there you have to kind of get into the discussion of like, what are you going to do as a practitioner with your actions or your karma? There's the one side, there's the Patanjali, argument. Well, you should go into the woods and not create any action. You should become a hermit. Yeah. And then there's the Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita, who is like, no, your life is meant to create action, and you have to give up the fruits of your action to the divine. And if you give up the fruits of the action to the divine, your ego will be in check. Yeah. That's the key. You got what is the purpose of your actions? If it's to service yourself, if it's for your own, to satisfy your own revenge or your own need for power or fame, then your actions are egotistical. Yeah, no, I hear you. And can I read just an excerpt from your exploration, which is really beautiful, I thought. You explain the origins of how we come about to this light being, this concept of a light being, right? And you wrote, in Sanskrit, ha means sun and ta means moon. And the combined word hatha for hatha yoga means forceful. Thus, hatha yoga is a focused practice of effecting transcendent energetic union in the microcosm of the yogi. It is the spiritual marriage between the solar light and the lunar light energies within the body to create a light being. And what I thought was fascinating was afterwards you go on to say, and connecting this to physics and quantum physics, you say, according to current thinking in quantum physics, all matter, including humans, consists of forms of light. When we start to understand the interconnection between everything, we see that connection is light. So loved the connection that you made between Indian scriptural knowledge with quantum physics.
And the minute you couch that in physics, the Western world, suddenly it becomes so much more acceptable, right? It becomes suddenly so
It
much
becomes
more
like, wow.
legitimate. Right?
Wow.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And you also, like, you talk a little bit about the light within us, and can you talk a little bit about what this meant in the African American tradition? You mentioned a hymnal.
Well, I did. I mentioned a hymn. We really don't know who wrote the hymn. There's a lot of claims that a white guy wrote it, but it was very popular within African American churches at the turn of the century. And it's, you know, this little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine. I'm going to let it shine. I'm going to let it shine. And it was, and the more historians of those traditions look, the less they believe that some Irish white guy wrote it. They believe that it was probably kind of created within the churches themselves and then published. But it's very interesting because you have this very oppressed group of people within a systemic racist society who is of no value whatsoever, and society is telling them they're of no value, and their song becomes, I'm of value, I'm of light, I have this light in me, and I'm going to let it shine, and I'm going to let it shine over your oppression and your darkness and your hatred that you're forcing me to live with. And that song then becomes one of the songs that is sung, you know, throughout the whole civil rights movement. And you know, King sang it while he marched, and it's the same idea. And it's what's so wonderful about it is it's really comes out of a kind of folk setting. This isn't like quantum physics. This is just people, you know, dealing with their trauma and their suffering, and then saying, what do we have left? Well, we have this light within ourselves that is keeping us going, that's allowing us to be a beacon of hope for our own community. And I think that in the end, that's really even what Gayatri is speaking of. It's speaking of this beacon of compassion and unconditional love that is within all beings. But we can very quickly and easily, you know, cover it up through our anger, our defensiveness, our own ego, our own fear.
A fear of the other.
The fear of the other.
Yeah, and I think that this is the hymn that you just mentioned, and combining that with a shloka, which is from 3,000, 4,000 years ago, from one of the oldest Vedas, from the Rig Veda. The fact that both of these messages across centuries kind of go back to the same thing about the light that we share, the interdependency of us as humanity. Yeah. Within a larger ecosystem, which is this planet, which is part of the solar system. Because like the Gayatri Mantra is supposed to be chanted 108 times. That's the 9 planets and the 12 constellations, technically. Yeah. If you think about the cosmology of this, whether it is in the African American tradition that you just mentioned, to going back to the Rig Veda, then talking about quantum physics, ultimately, at the end of the day, I think they all talk about the physics and the cosmicness of all of this is that we are fractals of this universal system. Yeah. Right? Yeah. And for me, this is an enduring message. And so in that sense, you are a light being. When we say namaste, I know we say, I bow to the divine in you. And it's the divine within me bows to the divine within you. But for me, I think of this as well as this, I bow to the light within you. The light within you. Reflects upon the light within me.
Yes. And, you know, and I think that like, you know, and I know that like in the, you know, there's a lot of discussion within the yoga world right now about appropriation of namaste. And, you know, my feeling is, you know, I don't want it to be misappropriated, but you are having the Western mind, you know, many of these, yoga practitioners in America have been either raised in Christianity or in Judaism, more than likely. Maybe some of them are from families that are agnostic or don't really have a tradition, but the majority are either one or the other. And this idea of I'm bowing down to I'm acknowledging and, giving reverence to the divinity or that light within you is probably a concept that is very new for most people, if they're white or from the Western world, even if they're not white, if were raised in one of these other traditions. And so they may not fully understand the depth of it, and it will take some time. It's going to take probably a couple of generations for it to really start to resonate that actually it's not just like saying namaste at the end of the class and being done with class, but that I'm actually seeing divinity in front of me and I'm recognizing it. And I'm willing to openly, externally acknowledge it. And the only reason why I can see it and acknowledge it is because I've recognized it in me. That's the key.
Well, that's
if you can't recognize it in yourself, you're never going to recognize it in somebody else. If I believe that I'm of sin and corrupt, I'm going to think everything else around me is corrupt. If I believe that I have that divine nature within myself, then I know that it is in other beings too. So it's a very difficult concept, and it's asking a person like myself who was raised in one of those traditions to turn off what they were taught and open up the mind to think differently, to explore and engage in concepts that might not have ever been spoken about to you.
Yeah.
And so, I would say don't be so hard on, the person that's just starting to learn to say namaste, even if they say it wrong, or, acknowledge that there's something that's being triggered, that they feel like they need to say it, why they're saying it, what they're actually saying, they may not understand at this very moment.
I love this. And I think that this is, next time I also say namaste, I also want to see how present I am actually in that act, because at this point in time, it's also a very muscular touching of my palms together. But if I were to invoke the sound of what we just talked about every single time, and in India, when you do namaste, you also bow.
Yeah.
You do this, it's like a bowing. So this is to the divine in you.
The divine in you.
And the light in you and the light within me. And I want to say this, and I want to end this with, I chant in the spirit of Nichiren Buddhism, called Nam Myoho Renge Kyo, where you make the cause and the effect follows. So very similar to the Gita.
Yes.
And we make the cause by chanting to awaken the Buddha within you.
Yes. And also, and which can also be the intellect. The buddhi is the intellect, right?
The buddhi is intellect, yeah.
So it's not just emotional, it's also like this idea of the intellect.
Yeah.
Waking.
I would like to think about the integrated body, mind, heart, spirit.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And that integration is what I think, for me, namaste now evokes within me. And it has taken me, just to what you just said, it's taken me many years in therapy to get over this extreme self-loathing and aversion. And it's taken me more than 15 years of yoga practice.
Yeah.
To really be within the body and to lead from the heart, and to be in the moment and to say namaste.
Namaste.
Thank you, Austin.
Thank you, Nirupa. I'm so glad we're doing this again, and I'm glad you're back.
I'm glad to be back too.